Bob, what is the irreducible minimum, and why did you develop this lesson?
I think Scripture is both so profound that we can never probe its depths. It's a revelation of the infinite, and being finite, we cannot even probe the infinite. And the only way we can know the infinite is what is revealed by the infinite to us. But at the same time, I think Scripture and the gospel is so simple that it can be understood by a child. And that's the beauty of our faith, is that it's both profound and very simple. Sometimes I think that as Christians we try to make what God is saying to us far too complicated. It is complex, but it doesn't need to be complicated. And having come from a science background in college, and in mathematics we had the concept of the irreducible minimum. There are whole numbers that cannot be reduced by whole integers any further than a particular integer.
I don't remember that, by the way, but that's okay.
Right.
I'm glad you studied that.
Yeah. And we call that the irreducible minimum. And so, trying to conceptualize the biblical message in its most basic elementary parts, how would you look at that? What would be the irreducible minimum of God's message to us in terms of how we should live? And that's how the idea came about. Well, obviously, it comes to Jesus' own summary, including Paul's, or the Old Testament. The Old Testament, Jesus, Paul, their summary of what does God say to us? What is his expectation of us? And it comes down to those two things. Love God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And yet, often when we think of the gospel as the great commandment, when we sum it down, it's interesting that we see in this lesson that both Jesus and Paul summarize it even further down.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yes.
I never knew that until you taught me that, Bob, that it can be boiled down even further.
Yes, yeah.
So, and just the power of God taking his infinite word and summarizing it and summarizing it and summarizing it until you do have this kind of irreducible minimum that is summed up in.
And when we understand what that is, it gives us a place to begin to truly be a disciple.
We live in a time where people want things simplistic. But this is not simplistic.
It's not simplistic.
It's simple.
It's simple, but not simplistic.
But not simplistic.
Right.
And I think this is something that the church needs to realize. What we have is something absolutely profound and yet very simple.
But then there's another dimension which is so important, and that is, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
And a lot of Christians, they may comprehend the irreducible minimum, but then their next question is, well, what do I do about this? How do I live it out? And we try to unpack that in this lesson.
Yeah.